Welcome, and thank you for joining Female Founders Fund for the first installment of our virtual Fireside chat series, Reimagining Tomorrow, featuring conversations with visionary female founders and CEOs as we delve into the ways that the world is changing post-pandemic. Today, we're going to hear from Julia Cheek, founder and CEO of Everlywell, the venture-backed startup focused on at-home diagnostic tests for common health issues. Everlywell never had the intention of getting involved with coronavirus testing, but once the situation became dire, Julia felt an urgent need to respond. We're excited to hear today how Julia galvanized her team around innovation and a responsibility for greater good, navigating the roadblocks that came along the journey, and helping to save frontline lives, all within just a matter of 2 weeks. In terms of logistics, we will be taking audience Q&A following our conversation. So if you'd like to ask a question, please submit via the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many questions as we can. Great, so welcome, Julia. So great to have you here as part of our first Fireside chat in our Reimagining Tomorrow series. Where are we finding you today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited. As I was saying earlier, I always look forward to the Female Founders Fund events, and I'm now able to actually attend because I'm in Austin normally and not in New York. And so that is the one thing I am grateful for, is the ability to connect, at least in this new way. So in Austin, Texas, which is where Everlywell is headquartered, and that's where I am today.
Awesome. So maybe we can start with just a little bit about your journey in starting Everlywell. So, what inspired you? What problems are you looking to solve? Would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think I'm a great example, but for better or worse, it's someone who comes at an interesting problem without the background in that industry. And I do like to say, I don't know if I would have started a healthcare company had I have actually known how difficult navigating healthcare is, right? And that's part of what you do as a founder, is you see a problem and say, I think that there's a really big opportunity to fix this. And you don't think as much about the walls that you're going to have to tear down. So I started Everlywell in 2015 as a person who had a really bad lab testing experience. And so I think many people can relate to this now, as the healthcare system has continued to not support people in their testing journeys, both from a cost and usefulness standpoint. And what happened to me has happened to millions of people, which is I had a bunch of unexplained symptoms. I went to a bunch of different doctors who all ordered a bunch of different tests. And I thought I had great insurance. It was a high deductible plan, and ultimately ended up getting all these bills for tests that I never got the results for. Was told I was fine, or I missed the phone call or whatever else. And I ended up paying a couple $1,000s out of pocket, and I had no say in what tests were ordered, and I had no visibility into if they impacted my health or not, and what the results were. And so I thought there had to be a better way. And I decided to really look into the industry, and for myself, I knew I wanted to start a company, but I also knew that there was a 99.9% chance it would fail. And if it didn't fail, and if it worked, I would probably be committing my life to this for the next decade. And so it had to be a really important problem.
Yeah.
And one that I felt personally that I could drive change in. And so that's really, for me, why I took the leap in solving this problem. Look, I have a lot of problems as a consumer that I don't decide I want to start companies around, and I hope others do fix them. But for me, this was really an important mission for me, to make testing affordable, accessible, and insightful for every American. And that's really been the core mission since we started.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing. I guess for those of you in the audience who are not familiar with exactly what Everlywell does, how would you best describe it?
Yeah, so Everlywell exists to make lab testing easy for every American. What that actually looks like is we offer over 35 different certified lab tests that are available for consumers to request and order, have virtual physicians monitoring, and then you're able to take them from the convenience of your home. And you get insightful, personalized results in about 3 to 5 days. And ultimately, in about half of our test suite, you can get prescriptions, treatment, and really take the next steps that you need to improve your health. And we cover really common condition areas. We cover STI testing from home, thyroid and endocrine, fertility, colon cancer screening, even things like cholesterol. And so the goal is that we're able to show people that there is a better way to manage and control their health, that isn't a mystery, that's not hitting you with these ridiculously expensive bills, and that can actually be useful in managing your health with your physician.
Right.
So that's what we do today. It's really similar actually to 23andMe from a consumer experience, but it's not genetic testing. It's really testing that can matter to your overall health on a monthly basis.
Got it. Got it. And I guess, when you look at the landscape, it's historically been very much dominated by two large companies, LabCorp and Quest. Where did you see, as a kind of bystander, where did you see the opportunity to disrupt, what really is, kind of two large players that have been around forever?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I did a lot of industry mapping. And so you look at the space and you look at the dominant players who really serve the payers today and who serve physicians, which is both play an important role. But what has happened and what I predicted and happened to be right about, I'm not right about a lot, but I was right about this trend, is that the cost of healthcare would fall more and more into the hands and pockets of the average American. And as such, it's pretty easy to predict consumer behavior when that happens. When a person has to pay for a service, they demand that it is better.
Yeah.
If it is free, you're willing to tolerate a lot. And that is the shift that we've seen, not just the last 5 years, but really accelerate in the last 5 years. And that's the opportunity that I saw to lean in here. Everlywell has grown at this huge rate because people are having this expensive experience and they want a different way. And then they have a really delightful experience, but it is fundamentally grounded in that cost transparency and affordability. And if you look at, I mapped this industry to some that we've seen make really big impacts over the last decade. Transportation with Uber and Lyft, digitally enabled, better service, cheaper. Warby Parker, dominated by two industry incumbents. Yeah. Better service, digitally enabled, cheaper, and high quality. So you can see this happen. Even let's take mattresses as a commodity example. Yeah. There's a lot of structural change or structural similarities in some of these industries and what I saw with lab testing. And, prior to the pandemic, we existed a little bit adjacent to the core healthcare infrastructure. And now we've begun that move as what we're doing has become part of the normal course of testing at home to become more embedded. And so that's been a really exciting move as well. But we grew a really big business being the alternative cash pay, low cost provider of testing in many cases, usually referred by people's physicians to us.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, in particular now, I think over the past few months, it's been, what you've achieved is incredible. I know that you received the first FDA emergency use authorization for full at-home COVID test sample collection kit that can be used, with multiple labs. How soon did you realize, I guess when the pandemic began, like what was your thinking around how you wanted to get involved and how you thought that Everlywell, had the advantage in terms of making this accessible to millions of people?
Yeah, and this is such an important lesson for me that I've learned through this process, and one that as I think about women or anyone wanting to be a founder, I just would encourage over and over again, which is I did not think that we had any advantage in helping to be part of the solution. I mean, certainly it did not cross my mind to say, well, Everlywell with our 60 people here in Austin, Texas should certainly be part of the national response to the pandemic. And that would have been a little bit of an arrogant way of thinking, except that as this started to unfold and the testing capacity numbers became more clear, it suddenly made me realize that we were in a very different position infrastructure-wise than I had realized. And so what that means is you had all the government and hospital labs, you had the two major players, all of whom had not gotten ahead of this for understandable reasons. There were faulty reagent kits. There was a lot of reasons why this happened, right? Which we can go into, but fundamentally we were significantly and scarily behind. And Everlywell already had a technology infrastructure that integrates with dozens of labs around the country, enables logistics and shipping in a really quick fashion, and then fast turnaround time to results, and then being able to actually have people collect a sample successfully and then get great digital experience and a physician follow-up. So that is actually end to end. It's like 10 different technology infrastructure builds and 10 different physical processes, all of which have to work to make this successful for a consumer. And so in that way, we saw the opportunity to do two things. One, and this was at end of February, we saw that the hotspots and couriering samples physically to hotspots and not having the air logistics and the turnaround time was going to create overrun at the labs. So what that meant is if we were able to work with regional labs that weren't overrun, you could see a world where our infrastructure actually was much faster, albeit at a smaller scale, but much faster than some of these overrun areas that were waiting for weeks. The other thing that we saw was that we would be able to lead an at-home, or I should not even say at home, non-healthcare provider setting, self-collected manufacturing facilities, employers, universities, at home, consumer-directed testing. And so we embarked on both of those in parallel. We first started with a healthcare provider product in mid-March, very, very quickly. And then we worked with the FDA over a 2-month period to get that authorization in mid-May. And we still remain the only digital health company that has an umbrella at-home EUA for PCR testing, meaning fundamentally at our core, we enable labs to have an interface with consumers. And so we were able to integrate with over 10 labs that have been able to get this at-home kit authorization through us. So it's really for us been this great ability to demonstrate the technology and the platform that we already had.
That's amazing. Can you tell us maybe a little bit more about what that kind of COVID response planning process looked like? I can imagine somewhat different to kind of the usual cadence of coming out with a new product launch for you guys.
Yeah, or the same, but in a really timeline. So we started, I was actually really inspired by one of my favorite digital health startups or patient startups, which is Row. They had launched the first week in March a patient screening in the early parts of March. This was very innovative, which was a patient screening tool with then follow up to determine if you were having symptoms. And I just thought, and I emailed my board on a Friday and I just said, listen, like we have to do something. We are a testing company and we have to involve ourselves here, but it wasn't actually for us to deliver testing. It was to provide some of these smaller laboratory operators with grants to be able to validate the assay themselves. And so that's actually how we started.
Oh, wow.
But, a bit unintentionally resulted in us then being able to develop the testing platform very rapidly, because we actually then awarded grants to these labs that were able to get to market very quickly. And so that was a different way of thinking about it. And honestly, a bit of a challenge, because at the time I was putting a hiring freeze in place in our team in Austin. No one knew how bad it was going to get. It appeared our business might fare very well for all of the reasons of virtual care and otherwise, but these were not obvious or easy decisions, and ones that required bets from me, bets from our leadership team, from our board to ultimately be able to serve in this moment, and bets that could have been wrong. And that is a lot to bear on my shoulders, on the team's shoulders, when you have employees and you have customers that are relying on you. And so I don't take those moments lightly. I don't really know how we got there, other than to say it was a bit of when you lead by instinct and gut, and you have a great team around you that can help validate and jump in the ring with you, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. In terms of the grant, that's a huge and I think very bold decision. And to your point, I think very much in line with that instinct and the idea that sometimes when you don't have a lot of information, you just have to make the best decision you can. And I think that was probably key to your success. What are some of the factors that kind of helped you make that decision?
Yeah, it's such an important question, I think, because almost every decision I have to make in my job, I have limited information, or 100% of the time I don't have full information, right? You can never have full information transparency. And sometimes you're making really hard decisions with the most information that you have. But not making a decision or doing nothing is also a decision.
Yeah.
And that's okay, but you have to acknowledge that that is in and of itself a choice.
Yeah.
And so saying, well, I'm just going to do nothing. And I think positioning that from a place of, well, that I have two choices, do something or do nothing. And both are still proactive choices that I'm making. But you really cannot be scared to act as a founder, because living in this moment of uncertainty and occasional chaos and lack of information and ambiguity is actually the definition, I think, of starting and scaling a company. And even as CEO now, having 250 people, the decisions that come to me are decisions that no one else can make, which means they're hard and they generally don't have full information.
Yeah.
And so it just changes. The nature of the choices change and all those pieces. And so when I was considering it, I looked a lot at what our mission was. I thought about how our goal is to serve the highest number of people possible. I thought about our platform and how we were uniquely positioned to demonstrate value here. And I thought about the business as well and my shareholders. And if we weren't able to take this moment and lean into a crisis, and not waste the opportunity of a crisis, then we really didn't exist to be agile and flexible and adaptable. And that's fundamentally what we are as a startup in this diagnostic space. And so it didn't feel as risky to me as in hindsight, I now understand it to be.
Right.
Like for context, Harvard Business School is doing a case on this decision point, and I've realized that it is a lot of in-depth questioning around. So your board approved spending $1 million in what might be an economic downturn to provide grants, and it seemed to me to be the right choice, and I think it was. But certainly, I had to speak with the team a lot about what we were going to cut and how we were going to preserve jobs, and how we were going to reduce our balance sheet by $1 million, and what were those trade-offs and those choices.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, just kind of taking a step back and looking at the company's history, you guys went from offering 3 different tests to now 30 and over 500,000 customers, 3rd fastest growing company in Texas. How, we're now in an interesting place, somewhat post-pandemic. You've proven out that, you can really respond in a way that I think has inspired a lot of people and has a lot of potential long term. So how are you thinking about kind of growth and expansion?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting as we make our decisions at Everlywell. So first of all, I've met only now 1/3 of the employees that work at Everlywell in person, and so we have had to think and simplify around what is our North Star, how do we make decisions in the business, and what are we grounded in? And our number one North Star is, if we can't tell someone what they will pay upfront for the full end-to-end service, we will not offer it. And I understand that might seem basic in every other consumer industry, but in healthcare it is not. It is radical. It means we actually have to make really hard trade-offs on companies that want to offer their really amazing products on our website, on who we integrate with, how we think about reimbursement. And yet it is so core to one of our core values of transparency that it really does help us make choices and trade-offs. And then, a few other examples, we're really committed to affordable pricing that can change the face of really chronic disease and infectious disease issues. Great example. We've seen dramatic growth in our STI testing suite over the course of the pandemic. We just launched a $15 a month membership for STI testing and then follow-up treatment as applicable. And that to me is another example of how we're continuing to innovate outside of COVID, where we're leaning more into this virtual care model that is affordable and accessible in what are other types of epidemics in this country.
Sure.
We need to be able to support people in whatever behavior and lifestyle choices they make. So that's another example. And I think our business, even without COVID, is up multiples this year because of the change in virtual care, and frankly, because of the unfortunate knowledge now that the American population has around the brokenness of our testing infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so it has been a crisis that we have been able to show that there is a better way and a solution. And I'm grateful for the moment to serve in that way, but I certainly wish the unlock would have maybe happened in a different way, right? So it's a double-edged sword, but if we weren't prepared to offer our services in this way, then others aren't either, because we are the market leader in this particular category.
Sure.
And now we can really expand and grow in that, as virtual care, I think, is here to stay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great point. You mentioned something earlier, which I'm sure a lot of other founders are dealing with, the fact that I think you said 75 of your employees, you haven't met, or, are virtual. What has that experience been like in terms of creating culture and, to your point, decision-making processes in this, post-pandemic world?
Yeah, I mean, it's gone totally perfectly, and we know exactly what we're doing. So, this is the challenge maybe of my career, and I'm trying to listen and learn and absorb and gather best practices maybe from organizations who have operated this way for a much longer period of time pre-pandemic. But it is a real challenge, and I will tell you, I have hired 4 members of my executive team without meeting them in person.
Wow.
And including my EVP of people and talent, who has then hired 150 people himself since he joined, right? And so it's a model where we do our best to be transparent, to share as much information as possible. But some of the ways that I used to operate in the office have had to change. For example, I used to share every bit of information with everybody at the company. And I feel very strongly that empowering your team by giving them the same information and holding yourself accountable to your team is just as important, because that helps them to make good decisions. But when you have 200 new people going through every single thing, it just means nobody gets anything out of what you're sharing with them. Yeah. And so I've really had to change what we emphasize, how we hold people to a North Star, to simple goals, and really, for me, clarify and simplify what's important for me to communicate to the team about the business. Sure. And that's part of sort of scaling in your role, but it's also this shift in, I try to put myself in the position of someone else working from home who has these sporadic interactions with the team, and how they must be piecing together their cultural experience of Everlywell. And I will tell you, it's what keeps me up at night, because I care deeply that people do their best work here. Yeah. And I don't fully yet know how to drive and create that experience yet. I think we've gotten better, but to be honest, for the first 3 months, we were like, oh, this is like a blip, and it's, I don't know what, to be honest, we were just in this like chaotic moment of just delivering. And so now we're putting in place, I think, longer term strategies and structures around virtual versus in person, et cetera, but it's not something that we have solved. And I certainly think this is part of the evolution of working. Yeah. And I'm really excited to meet founders that are doing interesting work in this space, I think, because I think there's a real opportunity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, there's a lot of, one could say there's a lot of drawbacks to work from home in terms of building culture, et cetera. But there are aspects of it that I think, from an efficiency standpoint, have definitely kind of proven their while. And so, to your point, I think as we adjust, this is here to stay to a certain degree. So absolutely agree with you.
I will say, I think one of the huge benefits has been, I have found my mind to be very changed in terms of what I thought it took to drive results in a company. I mean, I was the person where everybody had to be in the office all day, every day. Yeah. That is limiting, as we also then layer over our diversity and inclusion goals as a business. And I look at a place like Austin, which it's really hard for me to build the company that I want to build, just looking at Austin. And so I'm having to really challenge myself to think differently about our talent pool, where we build our teams, where we find the best talent. And that's been actually very freeing. Yeah. And so it's marrying those two things together, and then ultimately, having a strategy around how we think about our talent acquisition and retention.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. In terms of fundraising, I know we've heard stories of companies that have had to kind of go through this during COVID. And you've obviously been in a position where, things have gone relatively well. Any advice for founders that are kind of going through this?
Yeah, it's we are in a fortunate position. So I will start by saying I have always built the business to be very capital efficient. And I've been very fortunate. Let me be very clear. Like for my first 2 years, nobody would give me money. So this is not like it's been an easy path. My last few rounds have been fairly easy because of the performance of the business, but I worked for that results that ended up happening. And so I very much understand the challenges and the pain that comes with founders trying to fundraise and also run their businesses. But we have built a very capital efficient business, and we have been fortunate that through this period, we are largely break even and or have a healthy amount of cash on the balance sheet. That being said, I am seeing this kind of split in founder experiences. Yeah. Either you are frankly, a pandemic bolstered business, or your industry has really taken a hit. And it's a really unique moment in time where it doesn't actually appear to be founder or business driven. This is an entirely external factor that then you have to decide how you're going to operate through it. If you are on the bolstered side, I would go out and raise capital as quickly as you possibly can, because you will never likely have this same environment in which to do it, at least not potentially in the near term. And if you are not, get smarter, hunker down, get through these next few months. And, every founder faces these external challenges, and you have to be able to pivot and adapt and just preserve your cash. Sure. And it is, everyone goes through those various phases, but this is almost to an extreme in this moment. And so, some of the best businesses and founders are built during these challenges. And I certainly see that there's a lot of opportunity, but I also don't take it lightly. And I have a lot of founder friends and that are just going through one of these two sides. And it feels very, very hard, because usually you're in a recession and everybody's struggling to raise, or you're in where we are now, or I guess where we had been, kind of a bull market, and nobody is struggling, or not nobody, but the terms are just very founder friendly and things like that. And then to find yourself in an entirely external situation that's affecting your industry is a challenging place to be. So, I think always my advice is to preserve cash and raise early. And I think that still stands. Yeah, no, definitely.
So I'm going to close with one more question before we open it up to audience Q&A. What would you say are the 3 most important lessons that you've learned over the past 3 months?
Oh, this is such a great question. So, I have a 14-month-old son, and I'm a first-time mom. So just to be really transparent, one of the silver linings of me working from home is I really didn't understand how much I was missing, because I traveled extensively. I was constantly at the office. And so I have an entirely new empathy for working parents and for the importance, I think, of people being able to design and create their own work structures and still, deliver great results. And so that has been, I think, a real silver lining for me in understanding how the leader that I want to be moving forward. So really important lesson in that. And I hope next time I don't have to experience it personally to have empathy. That's another lesson, right? And one thing that I think can be really important as a CEO in a scaling business. The second lesson is that I think the Zoom structure has been, for me personally, for self-care, really, really challenging. Yeah. So I have really tried to move my team meetings to walking meetings. I'm doing some in person now, and really optimizing how I work, because I became not as strategic and not as engaged, and having to manage all these pieces. And so self-discipline around that, I think, is essential anyone to have that self-care and to preserve that. And then the third lesson is kind of a reminder of what it means to be a founder, which is as a founder, you really have very little within your control. You might perceive that you have control, but you have almost nothing in control. And so your ability to have a lot of stoicism around that, to be sure that the decisions you make adhere to your own principles, those are the things you can control. And this has been, I think, a really good reminder of that over the last 3 months, and just kind of having that stoic and absorbing ability to say, okay, it's out of my control and I'm going to do the best that I can.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great one. Okay, wonderful. So we have a couple questions that have come
Right?
up. So we have one here from Cheryl at Seating. How has COVID affected your actual other tests? So not the COVID related tests, but now that people are at home, are they purchasing kind of more and varied at home tests?
Yes. So I think I had mentioned earlier, maybe not specifically, but we have seen a huge multiple increase in our overall business. Both, so we have our .com platform. We're in over 10,000 retail locations as well across 4 different large brands. And then we actually have a substantial enterprise business as well. And so all channels have really seen tremendous growth through this pandemic. And I think some of that, to be clear, part of what's a challenge in being in a hyperscale moment is how much of this is permanent versus how do you think about post-COVID and making sure that you're managing that business accordingly. And so we've been fortunate that we've actually been pretty strategic in how we've viewed the COVID side of the business, such that we believe the growth is here to stay, because we've been smart about where we invested time and resources versus just COVID type of deals.
Sure.
And so I think you'll see this behavior change really stick. I also think you'll see rapid point of care testing across COVID, but also other types of tests really get a lot of investment, which is a great innovation for consumers if we can help those companies to bring that to market.
Yeah, no, I agree. Absolutely. Question from Danny at Kensho. Julia, what did you personally change about your working style or habits to adapt to COVID? I know you mentioned walking meetings.
Yes. I will be honest, I am not, one of the reasons I like being in an office is because I have very little work-life balance and I have very little self-control around work. It's a thing I'm working on.
Yeah.
Not like it's something I think is something I want to shout from the rooftops is a good thing, but when it's your business, it becomes very integrated with your life, and that, setting boundaries has been really hard for me. And so I have had to, be very careful, especially on weekends, to really try to take one weekend day off fully, right? And those kind of things. And to be honest, sometimes I can't do it. And I have to just acknowledge it. But what I try to do is then make sure I have a couple of evenings and I'm there for bedtime with my child. Sure. I'm there for breakfast. And so I have some of that protected time. I'll tell you, I'm still working on it. I think it's hard. And I think, we survey our team on work from home, and a lot of what they're experiencing is similar. Is they were like, oh, we wanted to work from home, and now we don't know how to set our own boundaries, right? And so I think working together to create that culture will be important, and me also leading with that example will be important as well. But I'm not great at it yet, so always looking for ideas and around that. Yeah.
Great. We have Andrea from Northwestern Law. What were the biggest challenges that you faced starting Everlywell, when telehealth and the consumerization of healthcare was not really where it is today? So, a lot of convincing, I'm sure both labs as well as the consumer, that this is good for their health and good overall.
Yeah, I had one of those startup ideas that nobody thought was a good idea. No, but like literally nobody, like not my family, not, my husband, like, I don't know about this. And so I share that because, I really believe that if everyone thought it was a good idea, then it would already exist. And you have to have, and look, I had long accepted that I believed you have to believe statistically that it will fail. But I just felt like if I did not try this and give it my best, then I would really regret it. And so, but it was hard. I couldn't raise venture money and I had to raise it in a convertible note. I raised angel money, but I could not raise venture money until we were doing let's see, 3 million a year in sales.
Yeah.
The level of traction that I had to demonstrate was significantly higher than others that I knew raising in the market, and many
Sure.
male founders. Now, of course, I didn't have healthcare experience, I didn't have tech experience. I didn't have, I was a first-time founder, and I was in Texas. So I had, from a pattern recognition standpoint,
Sure.
not working against me, but I fully, again, believe that the pattern leaves out so many tremendous value creating founders out of that pattern, right? And so I was really just taking money from really great angels and building a business until it was, in my mind, fairly de-risked. And one of my beliefs is even venture funds typically get things a little bit de-risked, right?
Yeah.
Usually it's had some amount of traction, some amount of angel funding, and our angel funding network nationally has been so important in supporting female entrepreneurs, underrepresented entrepreneurs, and just
Sure.
getting businesses where they need to be venture-backed businesses.
Yeah.
So that was probably my biggest challenge. And I think, you know, I will tell you, when I've been raising money for the first several rounds, call it three rounds maybe, the number one question was, well, we don't really think this is a market because you don't have any competition. And so now it's well, what about everybody else? And I'm like, I am so glad you're asking me this question. What a great question to get, because for 3 years I got the opposite one, which always makes people laugh, but it's true. And so I very much appreciate being in a space where I think a rising tide lifts all ships, and it shows just how much this space needs to be disrupted.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that. Okay, I think we have one more that we can end with. So last question, how do you see at-home testing changing women's health, from Sunaina?
Such a great question. I think another one of the reasons why 5 years ago, it was a bit challenging for investors to see the value proposition is I founded the business for a personal problem that I had. I knew women had the same challenges in getting attention in the healthcare system. And in fact, that obviously proved to be true in our data. At the time, it's changed now, but at the time, 85% of our customers were women. And we were first to market with at-home fertility, HPV, indoor outdoor allergy, a lot of these different tests that I think are typically underserving women in the right way. Women are also 70% of the consumer economy spending, and they're the healthcare CEOs of their family units. So it made all the sense in the world to me. And I lived in that population, but when you're often trying to bridge that gap, it can be really challenging with investors. And so I can't tell you the number of folks that I pitched to who would say, our female event planning team have all used your product and they love it. And so we decided to reach out to you, right? So I do think that at-home testing, and not just at-home testing, specifically affordable testing that allows women to be able to get the testing they need, whether it's infertility or thyroid or peri or postmenopause or sexually transmitted infections, women want to own that process and they deserve to own it.
Yeah.
And what you face now is a bias in the healthcare system that relies on these lengthy diagnoses to be able to get you any kind of coverage for these tests. And they end up being in the hundreds or even thousands of dollars for something that you are legally entitled to have access to directly.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's really a public access and affordability mission, very similar to what GoodRx or even what some of these other companies like KindBody, Tia, and others are doing in the market, that I think is tremendously important to women's health. And so, I love this, investing, women's health is now like a trendy investment. It's like half the population, right? I try to find it entertaining and not maddening, right? But I think that is really an important role that testing overall needs to play. And women are the key underrepresented and underserved group in getting access to testing at affordable rates.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're investors in Maven, and very much have seen
absolutely.
The industry is massive and underfunded, and I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting businesses. We were already seeing, but we'll continue to see in years to come. So I think that's a great point.
Yes.
Well, wonderful. This was really fantastic. Thank you for sharing your perspective and your story. Very inspiring.
Thank you
And
for having me. And the work that you all are doing has just continued to drive so much change, and also funding really incredible entrepreneurs. So I'm really grateful for the work you all are doing too.
thank you. Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.